Have you ever followed expert advice that made everything worse? You hired the consultant, implemented the best practices, adopted the industry standard, and 6 months later, you're undoing the damage. Most leaders assume they picked the wrong expert. But what if the real problem is something else entirely? Outsourcing your judgment to people who don't understand your context. Welcome to the Deliberate Leaders Podcast. Today, we're exploring why even brilliant advice can be dangerous, what happens when you surrender your internal compass, and how to stay open to expertise without losing access to your own wisdom. Let's start with why this trap is so seductive. Expert advice comes with credentials, case studies, and proof points. It's been tested. It's worked elsewhere. It feels like certainty in a world of ambiguity. And when you're facing high-stakes decisions, certainty is intoxicating. But here's what's actually happening when you adopt advice without filtering it through your context. You're making what I call a context swap. You're taking a solution that worked in one environment, with different constraints, different culture, different timing, different customers, and assuming it will transfer directly to yours. Sometimes it does. Often it doesn't. And the cost of that mismatch compounds silently until the damage becomes visible. This creates 3 patterns I see consistently in leaders who've fallen into what I call the external wisdom trap. First, the credential override. When advice comes from someone impressive, your brain wants to defer. Their success becomes evidence that their judgment is better than yours. But expertise in one context doesn't automatically translate to wisdom in another. The consultant who scaled Fortune 500 operations may have zero understanding of what makes a 50-person startup competitive. The framework that worked in manufacturing might destroy what makes your service business special. Credentials answer, do they know their field? They don't answer, do they understand my situation? Second, the proof point illusion. Best practices are called best because they worked somewhere, but that somewhere had different variables than you're facing. Different market timing, different team capabilities, different risk tolerance. What worked brilliantly for a competitor might be exactly wrong for you, not because the practice is flawed, but because the context doesn't match. I've watched leaders implement proven strategies that were right for the company they copied, but catastrophic for their own situation. Third, the wisdom surrender. This is the most expensive pattern. You stop trusting your internal knowing in favor of external authority. You override the quiet signal that says, this doesn't feel right for us. Because the expert seems so certain. You dismiss your intuition because it lacks a Harvard case study backing it up. Over time, you lose access to the internal compass that actually understands your specific reality. Here's what 3 decades of coaching has taught me. The leaders who consistently make the best decisions haven't eliminated outside input. They've developed something more valuable, the ability to hear advice clearly without losing access to their internal wisdom. They can take in perspectives, expertise, data, and frameworks without surrendering their judgment about what's true for their specific situation. There's a skill to this, a discernment practice that distinguishes between wisdom that serves your context, advice that sounds impressive but doesn't fit, frameworks worth adapting, solutions worth declining entirely. I call this your internal navigation system, your ability to sense what's true for your situation even when it contradicts what's proven elsewhere. This isn't about ignoring expertise. It's about filtering expertise through the reality of your specific constraints, culture, capabilities, and goals. Think of it like this. A map is useful, but only if you know where you actually are. Expert advice is the map. Your internal wisdom is your current location. Without both, you're lost. The shift is this: move from adopting advice to adapting wisdom. When someone offers a framework or strategy, the question isn't, did this work for them? The question is, what would have to be true for this to work here? That question forces you to examine your context, not just admire their results. One CEO I coached was spending over $100,000 annually on consultants and still felt lost. After developing his internal navigation system, He told me, I finally understand what advice to take and what to thank them for and ignore. That clarity alone has been worth millions. The most valuable skill in leadership isn't knowing more. It's knowing what applies to you and what doesn't, even when what doesn't apply sounds brilliant. If you've ever followed expert advice that made things worse, you're not alone. The executive edition of Think First includes the framework for developing your internal navigation system, how to trust your wisdom while staying open to outside perspectives. Reserve your copy at deliberatedirections.com/thinkfirst. Because the goal isn't to ignore advice, it's to know which wisdom to trust when it matters most.